Yun, no? Kamusta kayo dyan? Buenas sir. Ito Kamusta kayo dyan, guys? Andito na tayo sa... Ayan, nagsuot na tayo ng barong natin kasi perfect dito sa lokasyon na ito. Kamusta na kayo dyan, guys? Andito po tayo sa Venice. Kahapon gusto ko talaga mag-catch up sa inyo. Ang dami nating gustong pag-usapan. Of course, kasi September 12, may special holiday region. Dahil nga po sa birthday ng dating Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Of course, meron din tayong first in-depth interview sa pagitan ng bagong presidente natin. Tsaka yung si Tony Gonzaga, right? Of course, bagong talent ng... Ayan, re-reset natin yung internet natin, guys. Sorry, talagang yung internet dito sa Italy ay hindi masyadong first world. Hindi umaabot sa room yung internet dito, hanggang lobby lang. Ayan, kamusta kayo dyan, guys? Yan, tatak Pinoy, diba? Suot natin ang barong natin dyan. Dito sabi ko, perfect para sa dito yung barong natin. Ayan. Kamusta kayo dyan, guys? Yan, so, let's get down to the discussion. So, unang-una, meron tayong detailed na interview. Of course, quite similar ito dun sa nangyari kay Pangulong Duterte kung saan yung first interview niya is with someone who was very supportive of him, Mocha Uson. So now naman, instead of Mocha Uson, meron tayong iba, di ba? Iba na po. Iba po ang nag-interview kay Marcos Jr., in this case, si Tony Gonzaga. So we see some parallels there, interesting parallels there. Now, the interview was relatively probing, or at least extensive in terms of issues that were discussed. Perhaps it also reflects President Marcos Jr.'s yung kanyang kumpiyansa na to be more expressive and touch on more, touchy issues, including yung legacy ng kanyang ama, no? Kasi nga, at September 12, yun yung birthday ng former President Marcos. So siguro inevitable na magkakaroon ng discussion ulit dun sa kanyang background. Now, kung nakita niyo yung ating column sa Philippine Daily Inquirer, makikita niyo na I try to analyze the emerging political calculus, no, ng ating administration in light of some of the lessons that some ancient political thinkers had in mind, no? Not so ancient actually, in the case of Machiavelli. So ayan guys, kamusta na kayo dyan? Kamusta dito? From Venice. Ayan. Yan, nagbarong tayo. Barong boy. Barong boy in Venice. Para na. Ayan ang mga nag-photo up na rin yung mga tao dito. Magulo. Ayan, sige. Kaya naman tayo dito. Ayan, okay. Saan na tayo? Mag-chill muna ako dito. Yeah. Ayan na, may mga dodgy na lumalapit. Layo na tayo. Mukha tayong magnet ng mga shady people. Wait lang, dito na tayo sa kabila. Anyway, balikan natin tong topic na to. Now, nung nasa Florence tayo, dun sa Palazzo, syempre ang hinahanap natin dyan, ang isang tao in particular. Palazzo, of course, ito yung political beating heart ng the Florentine Republic back in the Renaissance period. Diyan papasok mga de Medicis, etc. Now, Machiavelli is actually a very misunderstood person and thinker. Now, una-una, ang kanyang misfortune was that what made him most famous was actually his most controversial and cynical work, right? Now, we don't know what that The Prince was all about. Actually, nag-stay ako dito sa isang hotel, Principe. The thing is, Machiavelli actually wrote on so many different things, guys. So many different things, and including Art of War, discourses on Livy, on Roman Republican past, on ancient republics, and the inspiration for the present. And that yung pinakasumikat sa kanya, yung naban na book niya na posthumously published, which is yung The Prince. Now, obviously, The Prince kind of has some sort of a cynical, manipulative touch to it. But in a way, actually, it was also a revolutionary work because, first of all, it talked about leadership as performance-based. Meaning, kung totoo kang leader, it's not because you inherited it, not because of symbolism, not necessarily because of some sacred sanction, but actually you become a leader, you become a true leader if you can deliver the basics. And the basics in terms of a society like Florence in the 14th, 15th century was protecting it from predatory powers outside and protecting it from predatory aristocracies from inside. No? So a good prince is someone who provides law and order. But more than that, a good prince is someone who also can ensure that the overall welfare of a society is protected and upheld. No? So in a way, this is the birth of modern notion of leadership. In a way, this is a birth of a modern notion of public administration. And of course, in the case of Machiavelli, for him, objectives are so important that sometimes you may have to employ even cynical or brutal means, no? Because what you're dealing with is human nature here. Now, again, the problem with the prince is that for every argument and example that he provides, you can easily find a counter-argument and example. Interestingly, the place where you can best find counter-examples to his own arguments in The Prince is in Machiavelli's other works. Kaya doon sa column natin sa Philippine Daily Inquirer, for instance, I cited yung discourses on Livy, whereby Machiavelli says that people are actually motivated not only by fear, but also by love. That people will do all sorts of crazy things for the sake of love, right? So it's a far more nuanced and humane understanding of what motivates human nature, no? More than that, if you go to the same page, I also quote there, he says that at the end of the day, what actually matters is the extraordinary capability of a leader, right? Whether he wants to use fear, love, whatever, kung mahusay siya, kung magaling siya, kung competent siya, he can get things going, right? He can get things going. Now, in his own lifetime, actually Machiavelli was an extremely idealistic person. He dedicated his life. In fact, if you go to Palazzo in Florence, there's a very small room towards the exit, no? Yung Hall of Lilies, etc., yung room na may mga maps, etc. Doon sa gilid lang, there's a little room called Old Chancellery, right? And then when you enter there, man, like from a distance, I know it was Machiavelli. Like just the gaze, yung effigies niya doon, like, I think this is where Machiavelli is. And if you look at there, actually, Machiavelli is described as a great statesman and a diplomat. A patriot, actually, for Florence. He dedicated his life to that. Later on, of course, he ran afoul with the Medicis in some internal power struggles in Florence, and he ended up badly tortured and all. So you have to understand that he wrote the book The Prince towards the end of his life, and after that, really horrible, brutal torture and experiences he had. So we really don't know what's the exact motivation that he had. Ano kaya meron dyan? Exact motivation he had when he wrote the book The Prince. No? Now, I don't want to bore you guys by making it this too academic, but my point is, sometimes we use the word Machiavellian without understanding Machiavelli himself and what Machiavelli was trying to say. Because if you put Machiavelli's works, including The Prince, into proper context, the guy is making, at least on some level, some sense that a good leader is someone who can deliver, not someone who just papogi lang or pakit lang or something like that. So this is relevant because when in that one of the few debates that our current president attended during the elections, he talked about being Machiavellian. I think he tried, in fairness to him, to qualify it along the same lines. He talked about carefulness, he talked about knowledge, he talked about skill. And in fact, the word that Machiavelli uses is virtu, right? Virtu. Virtu is the skill, is this capability. Not virtue in the ancient Greek sense, Aristotelian, Nicomachean ethic sense, but virtu in terms of basic skills and capacity and competence to deliver, right? Now, and if you look at the whole breadth of his work, beyond just the Prince or some controversial quotations from Prince, in fairness, I think he has a much more broad and nuanced understanding of how one can become a truly good leader. No? So yun lang. Now, why is this relevant in the context of discussion of the Philippine politics? Because, eto na, syempre ngayon nasa honeymoon period pa si President Bongbong Marcos. A lot of his focus is really actually on issues of economics, stabilization of economics. Nakatapos lang niya yung first foreign trip niya. I think he was able to at least project a certain degree of statesmanship, build some rapport with regional leaders like Jokowi, Lee Hsien-Loong, and also I think to prepare himself for the big meetings he's going to have with President Biden later this month. And who knows, maybe he'll be invited to G20 summit later this year. Let's see. And big meetings that he's going to expect to have with Japan, with China, and all of those major powers. So these are the interesting things you have to keep in mind. Now, as I discussed, if you look at President Marcos, he has multiple balancing acts to pull off. So this is teatro. Oh, look at that, how nice this is. No, so, speaking of Machiavelli, speaking of Marcos, just trying to stay concentrated here. Speaking of Marcos, he has three balancing to do. Three levels of balancing. First is internal balancing, that relationship with the Dutertes, who are a major pillar of the current administration. And of course, when it comes to Sara Duterte, she has taken a far tougher stance on issues of national security, much more forcefully behind issue of federalism and constitutional change, yung issue ng going after, NPA, secessionist groups, all of that, no? Mas aggressive. Yeah. This is nice. Now, that's one internal balancing he has to do. We saw earlier on that there were some slight differences, perhaps of opinion, of a stance, etc., in terms of what should be the point of emphasis. Because pagdating kay Marcos Jr., he didn't emphasize as much in federalism. In fact, he barely talked about federalism at all in his major speeches so far. And also on the issue of LCAC, no? He also didn't take a very strong stance on that. At the same time, we see he has tried to avoid also other touchy issues like human rights record of his father, etc. So only now with this interview with Tony Gonzaga, we see these things coming out. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. It's a very, very interesting thing to keep in mind. Now, let's see how far this will go. Because this could be a rallying point for the opposition and also provide ammunition for critics in the Philippines and abroad to try to portray him as another budding, you know what I'm saying, right? So that's one thing he has to keep in mind. The second balancing he has to do is how to stabilize the economy, but at the same time, have a more calibrated version of President Duterte's economic populism. Remember, pagdating kay Pangulong Duterte, one of the things that made him very popular, itong basa natin, is yung take niya against the oligarchs and all of that. So far, we haven't seen Marcos Jr. taking a similar stance. And recently, and of course by oligarchs, President Duterte was not meaning necessarily the rich men and all of that, or politically connected rich men. He was talking about those who were more with liberal leaning, right? And this is where the issue of ABS-CBN comes in. So Marcos Jr. actually has tried to square the circle and say, he's not against reinstitution of the franchise of ABS-CBN, but blah, blah, blah. So yes, but. Yun ang approach niya, no? And let's see how this will evolve, especially in light of the emergence of new media players, especially Villars, right? And of course, Tony Gonzaga is a big part of that, if not the big part of that. And then the third level of balancing that Marcos will have to do is in terms of foreign relations, U.S.-China competition, how the Philippines will position itself. And I think that's why it's very important yung visit niya sa Indonesia and visit niya sa Singapore, because those two countries have been very, very successful in terms of managing relations with these major superpowers. No? So I think this is the context that we have to look at. Now, Machiavelli is important because if you really understand Machiavelli, Machiavelli will tell you that a good prince is someone who can do all of these balancing acts so that he doesn't create internal destabilization or invite predatory uh, um, assault by foreign powers, right? So in the time of Machiavelli, Florence, for instance, the small Republic of Florence had to make sure that Spain, France, the Holy Roman Empire, which is essentially Australia, Austria, for instance, that Vienna would not be predatory and aggressive towards them. So they had to keep all of these major powers at check, not to mention the Ottomans on the other side. Although Ottomans never really came too far in terms of dominating parts of Italy, except the south part, etc. to a certain degree. But ibang discussion na yan. So there are lots of parallels there and things to discuss there. Anyway, sorry talaga, gusto ko talaga mag-proper sit-down analysis and all. But grabe yung schedule natin dito eh. Like, kagabi hanggang 11 p.m. I was in the middle of things, traveling, picking up bags, like, hassle talaga eh. Lalo kung mag-isa mo lang nag-travel, wala kang backup. You have to do everything on your own. At mga mabigat yung dala natin maleta, syempre, galing pa tayong Pinas eh, tsaka galing pa tayo iba't ibang bansa, tsaka yung mga trips natin. Of course, the real reason nandito sa Europe is because we wanted to visit yung Estonia, tsaka yung some military bases near the Russian border and get the point of view of Baltic states. So may pinost din tayo guys dyan sa article natin about internal tensions and divisions also here in Europe, no, in terms of dealing with Russia. That's another topic we can discuss. But in the meantime, guys, salamat. Nagpaparamdam lang ako kasi yung iba nagdrama na saan ka na. Napaka-demanding naman kasi yung iba dyan. Hello, may buhay din tayo, okay? Hindi ko, demanding talaga na iba dyan. Thank you kay Michael Uy, thank you so much. Kay Glenda Albeza, kay Jocelyn Lomberi, thank you so much. Kay Tintin Airbnb, kay Tony Balaso, thank you so much sa mga stars and supports na binigay niyo sa akin. Really, really appreciate it. Ayan, nasan yung mga comments. And good afternoon din kay Annabelle Juanilio. Yan. Kay Nico Gonzalez, thank you for joining us. Thank you kay Marilyn Doctolero, Susana De Fiesta, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Kay Imelda Molina, kay KJ Gersa Bellino. Yan. Ba't parang wala kayong comments masyado? Mahina yata yung internet ko dito, no? I think I should just have stayed in the lobby. Mahina kasi yung internet din sa room ko, so I thought maybe if I get out and all, the internet will improve. Parang sa lobby lang siya malakas eh. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't worry. There's so much more to discuss in the coming days and all. In the meantime, ikot lang muna ako ng content and I have to get back to work again. File some stories on Russia, NATO, and Europe. Alright, maraming salamat. God bless. Thank you very much.